All right, this is gonna be the last piece of this video. Last one, okay? So we're gonna finish up with structural design. We'll talk about a little bit about architecture and fashion, okay? But we talked a little bit about the bias cut, right? And the bias cut was revolutionary, really, because previously in fashion, up until the 1920-ish period, all of movement in fashion was done by draping, right? So the bias cut was very different because it enabled fabric to drape across your body in a very or drape over the contours of the body in a very different manner than drape designs. And the bias cut is a staple now. You see it everywhere from, the least expensive fast fashion designers to the most, haute couture collections. And fabric is an essential part of design. When we get to texture, we're talking a lot about fabric. And then, of course, if you're taking textiles, we talked about, or when you get to textiles, we'll talk about, hand and luster and drape, specifically those actual terms. So, so fabric is really important in the design process. And again, as you build your aesthetic, you'll also know what fabrics fit into your aesthetics, right? Which fabric fit into your aesthetics and just which ones don't. So, which hard or soft fabrics. I love the pairing of hard and soft together. So I love to wear, tweeds and chiffons in the same outfit. So something very hard over something really soft. Or, khaki pants and a really flowy light shirt. Some of my most favorite things. Actually, corduroy and heavier fabrics are my favorite. I love heavy fabrics and I love really soft fabrics. So those two, I pair those together quite often. Okay. And then next we'll talk about architecture. And again, in this chapter in the textbook, they cover a couple of fashion designers, and we talked about it in the previous lecture about how important the perfect woman's perfect form is, right? So fashion and architecture, they influence each other. There's an ebb and flow, and we'll talk about that when we get to actually, we can just move forward to the next slide. If we look at these two images together, so we look at this is the Walt Disney Orchestra Hall in downtown LA, and then we look at this garment. They have some similarities, right? Art and architecture go together. They just do. In terms of structural design, though, deconstruction deconstruction in fashion is something that goes hand in hand as well. And again, in our textbook, they talk about the philosophy behind deconstruction, right? And when we just talked about couture, we talked about clothing inside out may look unfinished or deteriorated, but it doesn't have to, right? And the opposite of deconstruction is couture, right? It's high construction, high sewing, where inside is just as beautiful as the outside. And for me, I love finishes. I love the inside of a well-constructed garment is finished beautifully inside. And there have been some pieces that I bought just because of this finishing is great, this lining is great, or this binding, or this stitching, or just the inside construction is really beautiful. So those are some of the things that I really love about structural design. Okay, and then moving forward, function, right? So it's really important that we have garments that work, that perform physically, like that we can get in and move in. It's nothing worse, and I've done it more than once. I've made something and it looked beautiful, but it was so tight I couldn't sit down in it. Like the waist, the fabric I chose, the construction method I used, just like this waistband is too tight, or this fabric has no give. I love using traditional African print fabrics, and wax print or Ankara fabrics have no stretch in them whatsoever. They are 100% cotton. They actually are can be crunchy, even so, some of the wax prints. And I've made some disastrous choices with a couple of things that I've constructed that just would never work for me, that I had to then pass on to somebody smaller than me because they just didn't work for me. So it's really important that, as you're developing your aesthetic, right, when we're looking at structure, that we're also looking at function, right? And our lifestyle is changing, right? The pandemic has really exposed in my wardrobe too, and I'm very before people were using the words curating, I've been curating my wardrobe to be very specific, so I know what holes I have in, and I don't buy anything that doesn't fulfill a purpose, right? And the pandemic revealed I don't have kicking it stuff. Like, I had a very small, I had really like athleisure, like workout stuff, like real workout stuff, but I didn't have a lot of loungewear, right? That was a hole that was in my closet. So, right. So now a lot of designers are moving more towards that functionality, because in the pandemic we have changed how we dress. There's an article that I used in one of my other classes called "The Death of the Bra," right? How the pandemic it's been the death of the underwire bra. Sorry, fellas, if you're in the class, but the death of the bra. Now there's some things that we just may never go back to. There was already that move towards, comfortable shoes. And when I say comfortable, I mean like athletic shoes. So, wearing a pencil skirt and tennis shoes together, right? And I now have so many of us have been home for so long that normally wore a heel or a wedge on a regular basis, that when the world opens back up, like, what does that look like, right? So what does that functionality look like in design, and how, companies are changing on a dime and onto what is functional, what people think are functional, what actually works now, what people are willing to accept. Will I still wear my 6-inch platforms? Absolutely. I absolutely still will. Will I wear them as much as I used to? Probably not, right? My feet are loving being lowered to the ground, right? So I'll probably just move towards wedges or platforms or something else, right? So functional design, and functional design is different for everyone. But what a designer does, or what a merchant does, is they understand the needs and move forward with designs that fit those needs. Okay, all right, and then last we're going to talk about the components, right? And fashion is broken down into just these components that we know: silhouette, right? Fabric, color, looks, details, and the thing that's not in here is accessories, right? Those are in there as well. So under this section of the lecture, before you get to the next video, there's a silhouette chart, so you can see what the silhouettes are. Of course, there's always modifications, but we'll be talking about silhouettes and body types, coloration, through when we get to those other. So when we get to like line and form, we'll be talking about body types. When we get to space, we'll be talking about silhouettes, and of course we'll be talking about color in depth when we get to the color lecture. Okay, all right, so that is it for this part of the lecture, for my recorded piece of my PowerPoint videos. And underneath, scroll down, there's a few more videos that I want you to watch. Make sure that you go through each tab, because each tab has a different topic. And any questions, send them to me in the inbox, or come visit me at visiting hours. See ya.